Okay, so Perry, welcome back to the podcast.
Well, thank you very much for having me back on. It's really a pleasure to be here again.
Yeah, no, likewise. I think some of the feedback we both received from the first conversation we had was just really fantastic. I've got an email that I was thinking about reading out to you actually, but I will forward on a little bit of it because one of my clients, after hearing about the Lymphatic Mojo course, went and bought it, did it, and what happened to him is mind-blowing. He's actually going to be coming on the podcast to kind of share his overall experience and his healing journey, and obviously it will include some of the stuff that he's been doing from you as well. So that's going to be fun.
Oh, yeah, thank you very much for that. That really does mean a lot, honestly. And getting messages like that, it's everything, right?
It is. I think it's nice to know that, your content, your work, your ideas are having that kind of impact ultimately.
Well, it's really nice because they had that kind of impact for me, right? I mean, that's why I created that Lymphatic Mojo series, because in our prior discussion, I told you how sick I was. And when I did it, it made such a profound difference in my life and very quickly. And I thought to myself, people need to know about this stuff, right? And to do it. And I tried to make it simple and easy so that any person can do it. And that's some things that really blows people's minds about how something so simple that you can do for yourself can make such a profound difference. But I love that too, because it shows you the power of how quickly the body can turn around and begin to heal itself if you just try to figure out the pieces of the puzzle and some of the things that it's telling you it might need help with. I really don't believe that we have to struggle so much in restoring our health. I mean, it certainly might not be an easy process, but I think that it's definitely possible. And when somebody's been sick for so long or had chronic pain for so long, sometimes they start to lose the hope that they can feel better. And then it's just this self-fulfilling prophecy where you feel like you can't get better, and then all of a sudden you don't, because you don't feel that you can, right? That's that mental aspect that we spoke of just a little bit. But we always have the capability to do some of these things for ourselves. And that's why when anybody messages me the stuff that I teach, they say, I'm not like a healthcare professional or a doctor. Can I come to your courses? Can I do your program? And I'm like, if you're a human being, you can do the stuff that I'm teaching you. I tried to make it that way to where you're like, hey, this wasn't so bad. It wasn't so hard. And I tried to frame it with language and words that don't intimidate you. And you get this fear that if you don't understand it, you can't do it.
No, I think that's key. It's that sort of accessibility that is so important in medical care ultimately.
Yeah, right. And that's kind of a beef that I have with medicine in a way. And I believe they're all doing what they can and their best to help people, but there's a disconnect some way, and it almost like you're elevated up to this on the mountain status because you went to school and you have the white coat, and then everybody below you is, that there's this disconnect. But we're all human beings in a way. And then when you can get that connection and then the empowerment, and I think medicine needs to remember that doctor ultimately means teacher. And the idea behind a teacher is not to teach you facts. It's just to help you understand concepts and put things together so you can begin to take care of yourself and learn. And then what you learn, you can teach to others, right? So it's a relationship that I think definitely needs a lot more work in our healthcare system today, especially in relationship to chronic pain and autoimmune disease. I kind of jokingly say that, you really don't have to communicate with your doctor at all. If you're a surgeon, you're out and they're just going to do their magic and put you back together, right? And then that's where their role is. And then that your healing journey needs to begin after that procedure with your rehabilitation, no matter what type that you have. So that human being connection is really vital. And that's a big lesson I've learned over the last 30 years in practice, but definitely over the last 5 years, the value of that communication and the words that you choose when you talk to your client or your patient, or just listen to the words that they use. I think we might have discussed that briefly on the last podcast, but it's just truly empowering.
Mm. Yeah. I mean, on that last podcast, you obviously gave a great analogy of what the lymphatic system is and some of the key lymph nodes within the body. And you discussed, I guess, its relationship with inflammation and the immune system and what influences it, like breathing and movement. And, you know, I started reflecting on it, and you think of how many of us are sort of, I'll call it poor breathers, for example,
Yeah.
and poor movers, or we essentially just don't move. And you start to have some pretty powerful interventions straight away. But going and, you know, diving into the research a little bit, there are some amazing research papers you'll be familiar with around dysfunction in the lymphatic system influencing cardiometabolic diseases. And it kind of just opens up this whole new world of how to support some of these individuals, and also why I guess so many of these health imbalances or diseases are so prevalent, if things like breathing and movement are key ways of improving the lymphatic system.
Yeah, exactly. Well, the cardiovascular system that we know of is like heart and blood flow, right? I mean, that's intimately connected to the lymphatic system. And, you know, I've researched and learned from many different cardiothoracic surgeons, honestly, because especially the enlightened ones, you might say, and they see the intimate relationship between the heart and the lymphatic system, right? And then I think I can't remember his name. I'll have to look it up, but he was a cardiothoracic surgeon, and he actually started doing much more work with the lymphatic system, and noticed that he had to do less heart surgeries, right? And then he was just like, he investigated like how much time was spent talking about the lymphatic system in the course of a physician going through med school. And I think he polled like 110 institutions around the world. And I believe the number was roughly 45 minutes.
Wow.
That you would have covered on the role of the lymphatic system and all your time through, you know, med school, not the specialty that you might get if you go into cardiology, but of the med school. And I'm like, wow, that's pretty significant, right? And especially when you start to understand the role that it plays with all of the other systems of the body. And that's why a lot of people, when they begin to work with the lymphatic system, their blood pressure changes quite significantly, because the heart doesn't have to work as hard when the fluid in the body is not as stagnant or as viscous, or what they call thick. So then the heart gets a little bit of a break. Doesn't have to go as hard. And then you get much more efficient delivery of oxygen and nutrients to your tissues like that, right? And then the interesting thing about breathing is that they've known the power of breathing in Eastern medicine and Ayurvedic medicine for thousands of years, the power of the breath. I mean, it's really big in the yoga community, of course, right? So it's a really fantastic way when you can tap into that to help the mind, body. I think most people thought about it as something just with meditation, but now they're seeing that breathing from the diaphragm, which is that dome-shaped muscle that sits near the bottom of the rib cage, that's actually that pressure mechanism. They call it intra-abdominal pressure, pressure around the abdomen. And that pressure change is what moves the organs, but it moves fluid as well. So it's not just like the heart beating that moves fluid, it's that breathing that moves the fluid as well. And it's interesting when you look at breathing, sometimes when we get into something and we look at it, we get very specific as that, you know, there's one best way to breathe, right? And then everybody's got this magic technique, and this one's better than this one, and this one doesn't work. But you soon discover that they all work. And that the more different ways you can breathe, in my opinion, the better it is for you, as opposed to just picking one way to breathe, because the more you do something just one way, the worse you get at a lot of other things that you're not doing. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Oh, I even tell people that, yeah, it's great to, like, they call it breathing from the belly, where you breathe in and you give yourself this little Buddha belly in the front. And I'm like, that's good, but that's only one way to breathe. You still have to breathe through your chest and through your lungs and through your shoulders sometimes. But you also have to be able to breathe through the sides of your rib cage, and more importantly, through the back of your rib cage. They call that 360 breathing or barrel breathing, where it's like you're blowing up a balloon, the whole balloon inflates, not just the front. And then you can discover that if all you did was breathe through the front belly, you can be just as dysfunctional as somebody who never breathes from there and only breathes from the shoulders, because you have to be able to experiment with all of those different regions. And we talked last time about that breathing from the diaphragm is the primary pump for that largest lymph node in the body that sits just a few inches below your sternum and a few inches above your navel. So to me, breathing is taught, like in the rehabilitation world and the pain world, as something that gives you what they call like core stabilization. You can get your central pillar, which is the space between your hips and your shoulders, to be nice and strong, like the core. And I actually think that's the least important role that it plays, because breathing from the diaphragm is the primary mechanism that moves your organs and moves the fluid in your body. And if the organs don't move efficiently, I don't care how many planks you do or how many back rehab courses you go to, you're not going to have a lasting effect. And that's a really important thing I would like to cover, is that everything that we do for someone can have an effect for a while. But I'm looking for this long-term lasting effect of not having to keep doing something like over and over and over all the time, and hoping that it sticks a little bit longer. But once you get this central zone between your hips and your shoulders to be moving really, really well, and you can do that through the breathing techniques, all these other types of things that you're trying to do for rehabilitation automatically just start to lock in faster and quicker. And what I've found is last longer. And that's always what I'm not saying you never do them, right? You don't have to do them just once, but you'll find that you're much more resilient in the long run, and you don't have to do them as often or as much to get the same results on some of these rehabilitation exercises that we give to people. So breathing is really, really fundamental to stabilization and strengthen the body, but also the ability to move the organs and deliver those nutrients that we need to the cells that are waiting for them.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. And I think I saw a post of yours recently that kind of stated the distance that some of these organs actually move. It's not sort of millimeters. It's quite substantial when you think about it, isn't it?
Oh, it's amazing. When I saw that, I was just like blown away, and they actually have that validated now. There was a guy, he just won, I believe he won the Nobel Prize, where they actually showed a real-time MRI image of how much the abdominal contents move with every diaphragmatic breath. And it blows your mind when you see the organs move that much from where they are underneath your rib cage dropping down towards your pelvis, right? And then that's that cylinder, so your organs move up and down like that way. And it's inches that they move. I mean, it's quite profound. So we know they're designed to move that way. Now imagine if they don't move. Because one, you're probably not breathing through your diaphragm like you were born to do. If you ever watch babies breathe, they get the little belly that goes, because you're automatically programmed to breathe from there. You just forget, or you have these adaptation patterns where through the stress of life and lack of movement or body positions, you just breathe through the shoulders or the neck. And sometimes it's also social context, because you don't want to breathe through the belly because it looks like you have a big belly, right? And then you suck your stomach in because you want to look thin.
Mm.
And so you lose that ability to expand through the belly. And so imagine if you stop breathing through the diaphragm like you need to, the organs will stop moving. And then think of anything in life that ceases to move. It just starts to decay, right?
Mm.
Like the water that we talked about, or things that don't move in life, they just start to rust and then they stick. And movement is life, right? And then you'll get some underlying inflammation in the organs themselves because they're not moving. And then you stack on top of that the lifestyle habits that we choose from the foods that we're eating that are probably not the best for us, right? And then the never ending, incessant, chronic stress of just being a human being in the world today, where you feel that tension in your gut, right? Everybody knows that tension of, you got to go to a job that you hate to do, you're in a relationship, but you just don't want to go home, that wrenching feeling. Or you read a comment on Facebook, or you have a troll or a bully online. That tension goes through your whole body, and then things stop moving. And you might not notice the effects of that lack of diaphragm breathing, lack of abdominal movement, constant stress in that moment. It builds, and it may manifest itself years later. And then you get this, all of a sudden, I have this pain that won't go away, non-traumatic pain, or the slow onset of autoimmune disease. And then we look for this culprit that happened like the day before, or the week before, that might have caused it. But it's the culmination of all those factors that went together. And I'll be honest with you, the work that I've done with the lymphatic system has been some of the most profound I've ever done for myself personally, and in my whole career in healthcare, but for other human beings. I mean, hard stop, period, right there. But then when I started to investigate how I can make the lymphatic work that I learned even more successful, more powerful, that's when it led me down into the organ work to affect the deeper lymphatics in the body. Then I began to study what they call visceral, which means organs, work from osteopathic medicine, from Eastern medicine, a lot based in Thailand and Asia, mixing all those different, because I like that technique, because they're not just about moving organs. It's all about emotions that get stored in organs. Like the liver stores anger, the lungs store sorrow and grief. So when I work on somebody's lungs and I release the lungs, or the lymph gets stuck around that thoracic duct in the lungs, and people, they sometimes just let go. They let go of this grief or sadness that they've had in their heart or their soul for who knows how long. And then all of a sudden they say, this is crazy, doc, but, first of all, they freaked out that they got emotional from something that I did, right? Because it just happens to you, and you can't stop it.
Mm.
But they say, since that happened, that pain that I had is like way better or gone. And it blows their mind. So that's like the emotional connection to pain, but there's also physiological as well, because when organs don't move, it affects all the tissues of the body, and you have compensations and adaptations. So I like to study Eastern and Western, because there's this typical like science, body part connection approach, but then there's this energy, chi, emotion system, when you mix the two together, that can be quite powerful, right? So the spleen carries a lot of worry, the kidneys carry fear. So all those things so the rationale behind that type of approach is that when you've got a lot of anger in your life, it can manifest with liver dysfunction. that you have. And it can go the other way too. You have liver dysfunction, all of a sudden you're like, dude, why am I been so edgy or angry lately? And I experienced that for myself, because when I was really sick, when I mentioned on the last podcast, for several years, I emotionally began to change. I just wasn't a nice human being to be around. Some of that was probably because I was always in pain, and pain wears you down, right? And you just get very snippy or you withdraw. But I had friends and family who would notice that I changed with my personality when I got that inflammation. And then when I started to do my lymphatic work or organ work and things like that, I mean, I had sessions where when I had some treatments done to me, because you usually can't get these emotional releases from these things when you do the work to yourself. And the reason being is because you're always in control when you do it. And
Right.
one of the reasons that you have issues with your emotions is because you're not letting them out in the first place, right? Or sometimes you don't know what you don't know. But when somebody else works on you, you know, that's where you're opening yourself up to trust another person, and your vulnerability is laying out with another person. And that's another huge aspect of healing from chronic pain. You've got to be very comfortable with the person that you're working with, that you feel that you can open up from your heart and your soul and let that vulnerability out with that person. Because you just might find you might not get to that final step of healing unless you're with somebody that you can truly connect with and resonate with. I see it all the time. And especially in chronic pain, people in chronic pain, very often they feel way better when they have another person on the other end that they're talking to that really is just listening to what they have to say. I think I read somewhere that when you go see your doctor, like, you talk for 30 seconds before they start talking and usually tell you what's wrong with you.
Yeah.
And I see people for 90 minutes with my initial evaluation. It's the most time that I spend with a client. And I've designed my practice that way because of the people that I work with. And I know most doctors in this world would probably love to do that too. But unfortunately, with the healthcare system, they can't. I want people to understand that I think doctors are doing the best that they can with what they have to work with, without a doubt, right? So the system in and of itself is probably the broken part, not the physicians that are trying to help people. But during like a 90-minute session, when you can get the more information and assessment, you have to waste less time with your interventions. And in medicine today, I found that they test a lot. They do a lot of the things they send you for, or the blood work, or this and this and this, and then they wait for those to come back before they begin to give you any idea of what's going on. And they've lost that kind of innate sense of, most of the time you should know what's going on, and you do the test and you do the assessments to rule out what you think it is. It's the other way around. You're not supposed to test everything and find the answer. You're supposed to go in with some idea of what it might be, and then you use that to confirm it. But then here's the part that is very mind-blowing. Many people are suffering in chronic pain, and all the tests come back showing nothing. Now what? Well, there's only one answer in the medical world. What is it? Well, I'm just going to give you some pills. That's the answer. Because I don't know what else it is. Let's just manage your pain. And that's where you have to go deeper and begin to look at these relationships. Because maybe, just maybe, at that point when you can't find anything, quote unquote, objectively on a test, that maybe there is some underlying emotional issues that's there that you need to address. And then most people might not be ready to go down that road until you've suffered enough to be willing to go down that road. Yeah. You don't go down the emotional route of chronic pain usually until you've suffered a lot. Because if you're comfortable, you're never going to go down that road because you're comfortable.
Right.
And that's what happened to me. Like, I can't remember if I said it on the last podcast. I used to actually scoff at that sort of stuff. And I was one of them. Like, if you brought up emotions and stuff like that, I'd be like, you're kind of being a little ridiculous, right? Because I was a very biomechanical person. But it's only when I went through my own suffering and the traditional approaches of what's supposed to quote unquote work scientifically based on what we can prove wasn't helping me. And I'm like, there's got to be something that I'm not seeing that's there. It's always been there. And I was just not ready to see it yet. And then when I was able to work with that and then take me down that road, that's when a big significant portion of my recovery changed. And then I could never ever look at a patient the same way again, but any human being ever again the same way. It just transformed me from my own personal experience, but over to what I do with my clients.
Yeah, I think the whole mind-body area fascinates me, and I have spoken to a number of osteopaths who have reported similar things to you in regards to doing some form of, I'll call it release work, and just having a real spontaneous emotional healing episode, for want of a better term. And more than one osteopath has talked about the psoas being a very sort of emotionally, emotionally accumulating muscle, as it were.
Yeah, you'll find that in yoga a lot. Even I believe in Ayurvedic medicine a little bit. They call that the soul of the body, the muscle that's the soul and the body. And it just so happens to sit right near the kidneys sit right in front of that sucker. So to me, that's going to make a big difference. So the kidneys, I said in one of my posts, are supposed to move about 3 centimeters every time you breathe. Right? So they're supposed to glide up and down on that psoas. And then that relationship with the psoas is going to make a difference in how the psoas functions as well. Right. But if you also look at that standpoint of fear, it makes sense. When you have fear, you have excess tension, right? Yeah. Well, the psoas muscle will tense up quick, fast, and in a hurry, right? And then you can go down really cool things, man, where the right side of the body is representative of the mother figure. The left side of the body is represented as a father figure. So if your right psoas is always an issue, we will go down the emotional road that there might be some kind of underlying issue in your past with your mother or a mother-like figure that's causing the issues with your psoas. And it would be on the opposite side with the left one. We go all the way up. Right. So there's many different ways that you can begin to look at things. And that's where the questions that you ask somebody, the history of their relationships, of the environment that they're in, that can make a difference, like that way. I do a lot of, but so when I look at the body, I look at everything, right? Because I talked about systems last time. And I'll look at your eyes. I'll look in your eyes. I'll look at your tongue. I'll look in your mouth. I'll look at your teeth. I'll look at because I know that if you have gingivitis in your mouth, it's probably causing some type of maybe chronic inflammation, autoimmune reaction in your body, and you got to get something done with your teeth. Then I'll look at your skin all the way down on the body, because that starts to tell me the condition of the internal part of your body, because the skin is a very large organ, on the largest organ on the outside of your body. And that tells me a lot, particularly the skin on your face. And I can look at the face. So I do a little bit of face reading as well, where the face can show me based on whether you have skin issues, pimples, moles, lines, whatever. All these things on different parts of your face can paint a puzzle of relating to underlying organ dysfunction that you have. So it's not definitive, but you put all these things together, right? And you say, okay, well, redness on your cheeks, red cheeks will usually, first one, it relates to typically low stomach acid in the body, low hydrochloric acid in the stomach. Right? And then I'll usually ask then at that point about if you have gas, if you have constipation, if you have diarrhea, digestive issues, things like that, heartburn. I'll just explore it. And then the other one that represents is lung. So redness in the cheeks is usually related to lung issues. So then I'll look at, okay, well, what are your breathing patterns like? Are you able to move efficiently in through the lungs, right? Maybe you have an underlying, I see it a lot of times, you have underlying candida in the lungs. And you always have, you have bronchial associated lymphoid tissue. It's called BALT. And then you get like mucousy, or you get backed up, or you hack or cough or clear your throat all the time. That's one of the things that happened to me, is that I would always be clearing my throat like every 5 seconds, and I would be sniffing every 2 seconds. Clearing this, it was just, and you know, people thought I had a drug habit. That's the joke, right? And then, but it's just like I couldn't breathe. Everything was mucousy, and then that should already key you right then and there that that's usually lymphatic. So I had a lot of that underlying congestion. And at the time, I actually had an underlying systemic candida infection as well going on that was a big part of that. So I would look at the face and start to put that together with examination of touching you, asking you questions, looking at your prior history and things like that. And then I just want people to be a little bit more of a generalist when they look at the body, to take all these different systems in, because if you become a specialist, you always tend to find what you're looking for.
Yeah.
Because, you know, that's your jam. That's my thing, right? But you need to step back and take a bigger picture. And one of the easiest way to give you your answer is by what the client ends up saying to you and telling you when you're speaking with them. Right? So my assessment always starts from the moment that I begin talking to you, and then it's very intensive of the hands-on aspect. So if somebody comes on in, let's say for instance, and they have a left knee issue, I'll start at the left knee, but I'm going to also assess all of your lymph node channels that I've talked about before. I'm going to assess your abdominal region, all your organs, and I'm going to assess everything from your foot all the way to your hand on either side. And what I'm looking for when I do that is this: no place that I ever touch on the body should hurt. No place on the body that should hurt, right? And if I press somewhere, then I'm going to ask you, did you just work out today? Are you like really sore? Because things might hurt if you just, you know, did like 50 lunges yesterday. You might have little sore quads or something. But when I touch an area and I have pain, what that means is that you have inflammation. And the more areas you have inflammation, the more I know you might have more of a full body issue going on. It's just isolated to your left knee where you pay attention to it the most. And I can't tell you how many times when I do that, you know, people are so focused on their left knee, they forget about everything else. And the interesting thing about the body is the brain can only pay attention to one pain at a time. And it's the greatest one, right? So you can have multiple pains, but you're only going to focus on one at a time, right? And so they'll zero in on the knee because it's high on the radar. But when I'll do my assessment, I can press on parts of the body that are absolutely excruciating, and the person had no idea that there was pain there. And that's the key factor that I want for people to take away here, is that you don't consciously know the pain is there, but it's always been there. And what does know it's always been there is the subconscious part of your brain that's always trying to protect that region for you, so you don't ever know it's there. Right?
Right.
Because that's what it's trying to do. But it's always trying to move around and avoid that region in an effort to protect you. So let's say a case scenario is the person has a left knee pain. That knee's been bothering them for a long time. They've treated a lot to the left knee. It's not really making a much difference, but we clinically know that we've examined it and there's not a tear that needs surgical intervention, and you don't have a tumor in your knee. It's just like, I can't figure it out. Then that's where you go and you look at other areas of the body and you start pressing and you start moving on the area. And then I may come and, let's say arbitrarily, I'll pick a spot for, it happens all the time, where I'll have a spot that is usually right around your belly button. So if you have your belly button here, it's usually going to be off and down to the left-hand side of your navel, right there. And I'll stick my finger not in your belly button, but around your belly button, around the rim, and I'll start rubbing in there really fast. And most people will scream because it's really, really painful. And they're like, what the hell was that? Right? And what that is that's an actual fascial attachment from the navel that goes directly diagonally across to your knee. So if you have tension in that umbilical region, it changes how your body functions with the rest of everything else in your body. So I look for an area on your body that has the greatest amount of pain when I touch it beyond the site of where your current pain is. Did you follow what I just said? So I know the knee hurts, but I'm going to find another area in your body that hurts even more. And I'm going to contend that that's probably the driver of the knee. So I'll treat both. And the reason I go to the navel is because in the Eastern medicine, particularly in Thailand, the navel is the center where all fascia begins. So it spirals out from the navel. And for them, that's where life began. And that makes sense to me because I don't know if you know what used to attach to that belly button. But it used to be how you were attached to your mother and you got all your nutrients, right? So we just cut that sucker off and then we forget about it. So it's sort of maybe kind of a little important. And when you work around that navel region, I usually always find a significant amount of fascial restrictions in there. And that's just more of like an advanced, deeper technique that I do when I do organ visceral work. And then most of the toxins that people have in their abdominal region will settle around the small intestines, which sits, kind of in the center of your six pack right there. But they'll pool around the navel. So that's a huge place where toxicity in the body resides because things leak out from the small intestines there. They're not supposed to leak out through the small intestines, called leaky gut. And then the lymphatic system is the first one there to greet it. So of course you're going to get swelling and toxins around that navel region. And then when you have a lot of toxins in an area that your body can't get rid of the way that it's supposed to get rid of it efficiently through sweat, through breathing through your lungs, through urination, through defecation, through your lymph, then the body uses fat as a way to move toxins away from vital structures and store them in body fat. So fat will surround toxins. So you'll get fatter because you're toxic. And so people will have a very, very difficult time losing body fat, even when they think they're healthy, if they're toxic, because if the body is lying down fat to try to protect you from toxins, whenever you train and work out, you break down tissue and you release more toxins into a body that can't even deal with the toxins that are already there. So the body's not going to let you burn body fat because it's going to say to itself, Perry, listen, I can't even burn what you've already got here. You're going to give me more on top of that. So I'm not going to let you burn more body fat because if you burn more body fat, I'm going to give more toxins. So you're going to get worse. So the harder you train, the more fat I'm going to make you. And then that's that layer of fat that nobody can get rid of no matter what they do. Or here's what happens. They train for a little while and then they quit because they get frustrated or they actually feel worse when they train. And emotions run high, they give up, they mentally fatigue out. And then it just repeats itself every year around New Year's, right? That's what happens, where New Year's resolution and we train, and then my offices are in gyms, and then 3/4 of the people are gone in 2 months. And then it repeats itself again because we want to change a new habit. We go 1,000 miles an hour right out of the gate, as opposed to the small baby steps. So people are trying to lose body fat and get in shape, but they're toxic. And So that's why I tell people you should do your lymphatic work first, some of the organ stuff that I teach as well first. So then you can begin to get some detoxification process happening. So then now when you go and you try to eat better, or you try to train, that now your body can actually absorb the nutrients from the healthier food. And then you can get rid of the metabolic waste that you're creating from the training that you're doing. So for me, I always have to remove some of the toxicity first before we start to supply it with the good stuff second. And most people do it the other way around. They try to do all the nutrients and all the training and put the good stuff in first, but it won't work as well unless you do the other one first. So the sequencing really, really matters. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, total sense. And it's just fascinating. And I think with time not on our side today, Perry, we've obviously mentioned breathing. We've mentioned some of what I'll call the manual therapy to support lymphatics as well. Mm-hmm. Obviously, movement comes into this. Is there anything that we haven't yet touched on that you would put under the sort of the term of lymphatic work that you do?
Well, those are the big ones for sure, right? I mean, like I'm all about like trying to give you the fundamentals and basics that if you implement these, you'll probably help like 95% of everything that you're trying to help, because they're just missing building blocks,
right,
that you need to, right? It's like knowing the alphabet. You got to have all the alphabet before you can start to put words together and sentences together. So the most important one is the breathing part for sure, because that's going to make a huge difference on everything, not just your physical and your mental state. And then the movement part as well, like moving more of yourself more often in more ways and more environments. And just like jumping up and down is a really nice movement. That really works great because most people don't jump up and down at all, right? It's just that like rebounding up on like doing jump rope, that kind of thing. Right. And then of course your nutrition makes a difference as well. I mean, like the more that you can get away, sometimes it's almost like the common sense rolling at you, but that's what simple things usually are. Try to avoid a lot of that junk food type thing. Eat a little bit more of the natural stuff, stuff that's from dirt, right? And somebody once said that you probably be pretty good in life if you can eat things that have less than 5 ingredients in it. You might be on a pretty good trek, right? And that's not easy to do either, right? I mean, I could give people like 2 different containers of food that you get from the center aisle in the grocery store, and it's got maybe 150 ingredients in it. And I guarantee you couldn't tell me what you were eating from either one, because they're going to look the same. Right. But if I give you an avocado or an orange, you'll pretty much know exactly what it is. It's very simple, right? So the more stuff you put in there, and then what I usually go to more in some of the advanced courses is if lymphatic issues keep coming back despite doing the basics and the fundamentals, then that usually means you have a much deeper immune system issue going on, and you're kind of what we have a maladapted immune system. I don't like to call it dysfunctional. It just means that it's doing something like way more than it needs to. It's kind of stuck that way. And it can do that in several different ways. And then the lymphatic system has to react to what the immune system is telling it to do. And sometimes it's a matter of have to do like a little bit of an underlying reset to the system to begin to calm it down that way. And then we get much more targeted at some supplementation like that way. So I'm not sure how much time I have, but I'll give you like a quick example. Like
sure.
One thing that I find a lot when people are trying to handle inflammation in the body, and remember the lymphatic system is designed to remove inflammation and swelling, is that they'll hear of a good anti-inflammatory supplement or anti-inflammatory food, and then they'll start taking it, or usually they'll take 4 or 5 different kinds of anti-inflammatories, right? But you got to remember that not everybody is going to react to the same quote unquote anti-inflammatory supplement the same way, where it can be really good for one person's immune system, but horrific for another person's immune system, because all inflammation is not the same. It's actually individual. Every person's inflammation is their own. So there's really no underlying quote unquote cookie cutter anti-inflammatory program or a cookie cutter anti-inflammatory diet. Some will work for A, some will work for B, but it won't work for the others. So let's say, for instance, like turmeric, curcumin, that kind of stuff, right? Big anti-inflammatory supplement. Well, for my type of immune system that I had an immune system that was very, very overactive. I was very puffy, very bloated, very allergic type of immune system. And then that particular supplement from me made me worse. Like I got worse. And it can make people who have that type of system way worse. And you're like, how's that possible? Because it's like an anti-inflammatory. Yeah, but it works on your body's immune system a little bit of a different way. So, but there's another one where people can have inflammation in the body and they're not very puffy. They're not very bloated. They don't have the allergic type reactions, but they're very catabolic. They're broken down a lot, right? But they still have swelling and they don't have allergies at all and they don't get puffy. So it's completely different type of inflammation. I can give them turmeric and then they're going to feel fantastic. They're going to feel fantastic. Whereas me, I would feel horrific. So it's just a matter of matching what that individual person needs. And then what I find a lot when I deal with people is they're trying so hard to get well. They want to take as much as they can because they feel they're going to get better faster with the more stuff that they take. And that's a really slippery slope because one, sometimes the body is so sensitive to things that if you give it too much, you're going to inflame it even more. And then many things that people are taking are counteracting each other where they're not helping each other. And then you just hit a stalemate or yeah, I get better for a while, but then I come back. I get better for a while, then it comes back because they're kind of crisscrossing each other off like that way, right? Or the person just is taking all these different things. And I'm like, how do you know which one of those things is actually working? Because you're on so many of them. So it's like, you have to tiptoe in. And I try to design the stuff that I do with exercises or supplementation or nutrition, almost like I'm trying to assess somebody who might have food sensitivities. The idea is that you begin to restrict things away from them and you see how they feel when they begin to peel things away in their life. You don't have to take them away all at once because that's usually where people will quit because it's too hard. And then I'm going to say, how did you feel when you didn't eat this for a couple of days? Holy cow, I felt like really good. Okay, well, that's good. So we know something, right? And then they say, oh, not really much of a difference. And then, okay, so then we go and we try another thing. And then we can slowly begin to reintroduce things. Because what I want to be is I want to see how this person reacts to things that I might remove their environment and things that I add to their environment. And one of the reasons that people fail and when they're trying to change a lifestyle or behavior is they try to change everything in one shot. And it's a shock to the system and it's too hard. And then they end up quitting because it's too hard. Mm-hmm. But you tiptoe in. Right. But that's also a mindset thing because people want stuff done and they want to feel better like yesterday. And they have to realize that you got to go trickle in slow. So many of the people that I see who have chronic inflammation and autoimmune disease, they're usually doing way too many things at one time. And we just have to get much more targeted. Pardon me. And then by the questions that I ask them, I can usually tell what I might want to do with them when I do some nutrition work or supplementation work and things like that, if that makes sense. So then we go much, much deeper on an individual basis. But the reason that I created the lymphatic program and the visceral program is because if you do this one, that's the best baseline, simple way to reset like every human being. And it, 95% of the people will feel much better when they do it. And then those ones that are like, man, I felt good, but it's still here or it didn't do anything at all. That's where you can go a little bit deeper and you have to get a little bit more specific. But you still have to start with those basics and fundamentals first anyway, regardless. That has to come first. So the order of things really, really makes a difference. But like I said last time, I never do anything to any client in my office without assessing and resetting the lymphatic system first, no matter what. So that always comes first. And it can be a huge player for people, or it can be a small player. But either way, it's always a player.
Amazing. It just fascinates me, Per. I think there's a lot that I need to go away and read.
No, me too, man. You know, I'm always learning, and every day I come across something, and the learning part's fun for me, but
Yeah.
really what gives me the most joy is just trying to connect different things together that I learn.
Yeah.
Right. That's the part that I find quite fascinating.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's I think that's the bit that I particularly enjoy as well. It's when you are kind of creating your own dots, and then especially when you can go away and validate them, and you've realized that you have understood the concept, the mechanisms, that fundamentally you've kind of mastered the topic, I guess, to at least some degree. But it's certainly what you says, it connects a lot of dots. It connects dots around the importance of breathing. It connects various dots around movement and what other research is showing. So a good friend of mine, Pete Williams, posted recently around movement or a lack of it, and what happens from a circulatory perspective in the brain, for example. So not necessarily from just a lymphatic perspective, but from a basic circulatory perspective. So all of these things are just so interconnected. And it's nice that we can come back to some of these same teachings, though.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think that what you'll come to discover is that, you know, everything works for someone with what you're doing. And that's the beautiful part about all these different types of therapies, right?
Yeah.
And to mix in well together. I think a central theme that kind of comes up a lot is that moving is a fundamental part of being a human being, and to staying healthy and regaining your health. And for me, it's about moving, but it's also doing different types of movement, because you can get pain, discomfort, or have issues in your body when you don't move enough. But you also can get just as messed up if you do the same kind of movement all the time.
Right.
So that's why it's not just lack of movement, it's a lack of variation and variety and variability in movement. And that's what the human being, that's what the brain is designed for. The brain likes things that are very novel and different. Otherwise, the brain becomes stagnant, because it's like, hey, man, been there, done that. Like, you got anything else for me to do? And, you know, it's craving that sort of stuff. But then it just stops paying attention to anything because it's already been there. And that's actually when you can get hurt, because when you start to do different movement patterns and things like that, you start paying more attention to what you're doing. You have more awareness. And one of the underlying first things that can begin to decrease pain is to have more awareness during your movement.
Yeah. Yeah. The power of novelty.
Yeah. Novelty is really, really big. So the brain needs that difference factor in it. Brain needs movement. So if you can mix some movement and then novelty together, and then throw in variation, and then those are 3 key ingredients. But the 2 most powerful ones that if you add those in will give you the biggest change in your body, and that's meaning and emotion. So if you can bring meaning to a movement and you can bring emotion to a movement, that's how you're going to own it. That's the one that you're going to own for life. So the first 3 are important, but the last 2, they're what I call the creamy filling of the donut, man. Like, that's the one that you want. So that's why when you do rehabilitation things, you should do movements that are meaningful to the patient, right? Or emotional to the patient. Because it's kind of like the classic, whiff 'em, what's in it for me?
Right.
Thing. Otherwise, why the hell should I care? That's honestly the way the brain thinks. pops on. And that's any type of education, not just for movement, but learning anything. Even kids in school today, if you don't put meaning and emotion behind it when they learn something, they ain't going to learn it. They're going to forget it. Because why should they remember it?
Yeah.
Right?
No, that's a massive point. Massive point.
I got that from a neuroscience book. Those 5 things: novelty, movement, variability, meaning, and emotion. You need all 5.
Awesome. I like it. It's a nice framework, definitely.
I agree.
Yeah. Excellent, Perry. We will have to conclude it there, I'm afraid. But I think round 3 at some point this year is on the cards.
I'd love to. You know me, I can always roll and just talk about anything. It was a fun episode, man. We may blow some minds here talking about emotions and organs and, all sorts of different things like that. But it's all good, man. I mean, it's just great that people can see many different types of perspectives and on the body.
Definitely.
That's what it's all about.
Yeah, 100%. Thank you very much, Perry. It's always a privilege to speak to you and hear you speak. And as I say, I'm sure we'll chat again at some point in the future.
I love it, brother. Thank you very much for having me back on and for everybody tuning in again. Take care.
Final question. Are you ever teaching this side of the pond?
Yeah. I've got courses lining up in throughout the year that I'm adding more as I go along. So I know I've got in July, I'm pretty excited. I've got a brand new course I'm launching in London. It's called my Fluid Force Systems one. That's the one where I'm going to talk more about the blood flow control in the body. And, of course, mixed with the lymph. But that's some really cool things that I'm introducing here as well. And then I've got a brand new course launching all about the vagus nerve, the cranial nerve that will help people with stress or chronic pain and things like that. And of course, I'm going to put my own little spin on the vagus nerve by mixing a lot of the stuff that I've learned from Eastern medicine and Western medicine that blend quite well together. But yeah, I'll definitely be over there for sure.
Okay. I'll find the details and put them into the show notes as well. So if people are interested in learning from you ultimately, then head over to alexmanos.co.uk and there will be details there.
Great. Perfect. Thank you very much. I'd appreciate that.
No, my pleasure. All right, Perry, I'll have to love you and leave you, but thank you very much. And we'll speak soon.
Take care. Bye. Thanks, Alex.
Take care.